Everyone, thank you for listening to this edition of the Keynote on Speaking Engagement. I'm Ryan Catherwood. This week we have Michael Latsko, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer at the Arizona State University. On this episode, we discuss what Arizona State is working to do to innovate and bring a new era of engagement, and how Michael is thinking about the importance of talent development and employer engagement and his work with President CHRO at Arizona State in order to make this all happen. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Coming up, my interview with Michael Latsko from Arizona State University. Michael Latsko, thank you so much for being on this week's edition of the Keynote podcast on speaking engagement. I am so glad to have you. Thank you for spending some time with me today.
Glad to be here, Ryan. It's great to see you.
I find the Arizona State University to be one of the most fascinating schools on the planet right now. Talk to me a little bit about when you think about engagement at a university like Arizona State. Where does HR fit into the conversation?
So ASU, like you said, one of the most fascinating places, and not a place I knew a lot about. I did the New York Times crossword puzzle, and the word Tempe, the city in which ASU is headquartered, main campus, comes up a lot, and so did the letters ASU. But other than that, I didn't know a lot about Arizona State University. So part of the foundational and governing principles is the ASU Charter. And the ASU Charter was put in place by President Michael Latsko about 13, 14 years ago. And the charter has three basic premises. Number one, we are a comprehensive research university based not on whom we exclude, but on whom we include in how they succeed. Number two, conducting research of public value. And number three, assuming responsibility for all the communities in which we serve. And by responsibility, we mean socioeconomic health, physical health, all of the attributes that make up a great community.
We're both engagement professionals in many ways. We use a lot of the same tools that human resources would use in order to retain its workforce. Like, what does it mean to have an engagement strategy for your workforce? And maybe expand on the idea that what you're trying to do is retain your workforce. What are some of the other key measurables that you work towards?
Great question, and absolutely agree on the different the similarities right through alumni engagement and, let's say, faculty and staff engagement. And I'll speak principally to staff at this point because the faculty report through to the provost's office, and so the provost has sort of academic personnel or people within their purview. So retention is key. Obviously, you need people to do the work. And I would go a bit further to say it's not just retention. You need a body and a seat. You need people who are committed to the work that you are doing. And at ASU, especially, having now for, I think, the 11th year running, been declared the number one in innovation university in the country, there is this notion that we are constantly, and this might sound paradoxical, but we're tearing down always to innovate. And by that, I mean, I was told when I came here, ASU is unlike other higher education institutions. And you hear that and you're like, yeah, right. So when I got here and I took a tour of the campus, I was shown a couple of the innovations they have with regard to the student curriculum. They have a partnership with Dreamscape where they're doing a lot of virtual reality learning, and especially in the fields of natural sciences, so biology. I put on goggles, I put on a little headset, I then dissected a frog. And of course, there was no real frog there, but I felt it feel like a frog. Fortunately, it did not smell like the frogs that I recall from my days in biology. But the point is, how do you teach students in new and different ways? So that was but one thing. I saw their emphasis on space exploration and conservation of the planet is very important. And carbon capture was a new technology that they were showing off. So all of these innovations going on. And so in curriculum, in academic curriculum, which has been going on for hundreds of years, and some might say you just sort of stamp it out university to university. And so how do you get people to think about the work that they're doing and constantly keeping it refreshed, invigorated, changing, because you don't want it to fall within sort of complacency. You need people, but you got to have them committed to everything else that the university wants to accomplish.
I think higher education institutions strive towards tradition as a key objective, that all students throughout their tenure experience and therefore have a strong sense of what makes the school unique is those traditions. And at Arizona State, innovation is a tradition, but it also kind of flies in the face of tradition, because if something is ever always changing, then it's never a same shared experience other than the change itself. And it's really an interesting dynamic at your school. Reflect on that sort of interesting paradox a little bit, the tradition and innovation.
So the way I view it is if you think about what it means to bring students together in a setting, right? And let's call it a residential hall or university or academic environment. It is that sense of community where they are there and they are principally there to learn. Now, of course, other students might say, well, I'm really there to do other things besides learning, but the core concept, right, of an academic institution is to learn and to explore and to engage in the scientific method. And by that I mean perform experiments, most of which will fail. 90% of experiments fail. And so you iterate on that and you change the variables and you continue to do things again and again until you get what is the desired outcome, and you're learning along the way. And so I think that, tradition in the sense of innovation is coming together as a community, performing that function of iterating and learning and seeking out and being curious is a constant. And then ASU, which in addition to 80,000 students who show up on our 4 different campuses, we have 110,000 students who learn online. And so ASU was one of the earliest universities to really go all in on online learning and to figure out ways to take what had been successful in classroom pedagogy, right, the way one teaches, and to do that online, to bring with it that sense of community, that sense of ongoing curiosity, that sense of sharing in the scientific method.
I bet you have had a number of really interesting experiences since you've been there, as you've gotten to work doing your job. What might be something that, in broad strokes, might surprise people?
Number one, just the sheer scale and scope, right? So as I said, all in, there's 200 plus thousand students. And when you go to a university commencement at ASU, we're graduating 40,000 people this coming May. There are schools at ASU, the School of Engineering, the School of Business, that are 35,000 students, right? These are themselves the size of large, major U.S. universities. And yet we are now all working together. Virginia had 12 deans. ASU has 23 deans. It's surprising that you can even keep something like this going, because how in the world do you coordinate everything that's going on? Number two, the thing that surprised me is the number of public-private partnerships in which ASU is engaged. And I described the one with DreamWorks as an example of that virtual reality teaching science, right? And I know there are other higher educations that engage in these public-private partnerships, but ASU really seeks them out. We have a program with Starbucks, for example, the College Achievement Program, where baristas at Starbucks can get a degree from ASU, right? The thinking here is we want to continue that learning for people, no matter where they are, no matter what path they've taken. And so this constantly figuring out how we're going to keep going, reaching out to people who, like the charter says, not whom we exclude, but how can we include them, and how do we ensure their success? So that size and the scale and the scope surprises me. The other thing that surprises me here is, despite its size and the breadth and the scope that I've just described, people are just incredibly helpful. When I go, and I've been here 3 years, if I go and I ask people, I have this idea, I want to talk to you about a concept we're kicking around or considering, they're all in. And so the president, always is talking about how we're living up to the values stated in the charter. And then he talks about access, and it's the take all comers approach, right? Arizona State University, in that first part of charter, how people who we include and how they succeed, how do we get them here no matter what path they've taken? If they started college, but maybe a family member got sick, so they had to drop out, or they just didn't like what they were studying. If you have the aptitude and you can, you know, get here, we'll receive you and we will impart to you all of the assets that ASU has so that you can continue your education and your learning. And to me, there's nothing really more edifying than that. And he makes the distinction not to denigrate, but he talks about the elitism of many, many schools because they have enrollments that are small. And so in order to have a small enrollment, you have to focus on the very, very best students. And so you're only accepting one in every, pick a number, 10 who apply. Here, he wants to flip that. He wants to accept anybody who can meet the academic standards that are established for admission. If you can meet them, we'll get you here. We'll figure out a way to have you learn through the online programs or through the in-person programs. And so, for example, it shows up internally when we hire student workers. And we have all across the university about 10 to 14,000 student workers going at any time. And here's the thing about HR at a higher education institution that I love. I have the future workforce here as students for some number of years, right? These are the people who are going to graduate from the university and go into the workforce. As an HR professional, why am I not spending all my time talking to these people about the ways they communicate, what they're learning about, sort of the modalities of technology that they're using? And so I make it a point to do that. And so the student workers that we've then hired back on a permanent basis, are blowing us our brains because they're able to build new apps. They're able to do things in innovative ways that we, have been doing in very sort of, let's say, traditional or legacy ways.
As you think about this unique dynamic, are there any downsides to this non-traditional inclusive approach?
Yeah, I'll give you, I'll say three quick ones, I think. Number one is it does that momentum, the sort of energy required, right, to place going. Can be all consuming. And so as an HR leader, I want to make sure that we've got wellness at the forefront, right? We want to make sure people are not overworked, people are not burning out, because it could be easy to do that. So number one, you got to
Yeah,
watch out for that.
if you're always innovating and you're constantly changing, you're always in this period of discomfort.
Yeah. And then and number two, sort of similar point, you get to the point where it's easy to go, well, that's the way we've always done it. And one time I was having a conversation with the president, and I was describing a way it had been done at my prior institution. And he said, ideally, I would love that way. However, short of that, what can we do? And to me, that was a very telling sort of mental framing, because I thought he creating this model of the new American university ran into obstacles constantly, right? The faculty who came from traditional universities, other administrators, maybe even the people of Arizona, his peers, and he kept going, right? And maybe even alumni who had sort of their rose-colored glasses view, nostalgic view of what ASU was all about. And he kept going. And so you got to be able to keep going, and not everybody fits into that, right? So that it's not just the sort of energy required, but it's the mindset that is required. And then finally, I would say the culture. So you could come here, you want to be exciting and a part of that exciting environment, but you come from a place that sort of had relied on, let's say, the comfort of that's the way we've always done it, or tradition. And so sometimes there are culture clashes, right? And sometimes not everybody works out when they come here to work, fit into what it takes to make ASU keep its special spot.
I was wondering while you were describing the trajectory under President. Would you say that in your experience over your tenure so far, that you've noticed people talking about the way things used to be? Or do you think that there is a much more focused on this positive directional change towards a new American university?
There is no doubt. And I've talked to alumni, I've talked to people, long-term employees. The place looks completely different. So we've got these public-private partnerships that have built office buildings and other laboratories and things. So you've got all that, sort of just the actual physical environment has completely changed. The reputation, academic reputation of many of the programs, that's completely changed. And yeah, there is no doubt he is at the nucleus of that change, right? And how he has built up a leadership team and how we're thinking about leadership succession, if you will, right? Or the next generation of leaders. How do we make sure that we've got people who are continuing that momentum? Because the university or the nation and the world, he contends, right, needs this kind of university now. Now, he's not saying it's the only kind of university that people need, right? There are other universities that are doing great things. However, his model, this new American university, is also needed to help us continue to educate, right, people who come through the doors.
Do you think that there's work to do on creating a culture whereby President Crow's vision of the new American university also translates into more generosity and investment?
I think he would certainly say there's always work to do. And,
Yeah.
if you look at, say, the size of the endowment of ASU relative to its revenue, you'd think there'd be more in the endowment. If you're taking all comers like ASU is doing, many of whom really couldn't afford to be here, but for the financial aid that ASU is able to provide them, and they're going back out into the workforce, they're likely not getting the same levels of jobs and the same levels of salaries, or they aren't coming from families who have histories of philanthropy, especially if they're first gen coming into college. So that's playing out in what you see in the size of the endowment. So I think what you would hear from leadership here is there's always going to be work to do. There are incredibly loyal and generous alumni, absolutely. And can we continue that trajectory to get people sort of thinking more about ASU long term when it comes to philanthropy?
Thinking about how the notion of elitism impacts generosity and investment, and how a school that makes accessibility its at its most important construct, where no matter who you are welcome. No matter what age you are welcome. It's all, as you said, it's all comer. Like, it also presents potentially some challenging dynamics as it relates to
Yeah.
stimulating affinity, connectivity. Where do you see your role there in sort of addressing engagement challenges before they happen?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question and it's complicated, right? Because you just have said you've laid out a number of constituencies, right? A groups of stakeholders. You've got staff, you've got faculty, you've got the students, you've got the alumni, you've got all those people who are in the private public partnerships, right? Maybe some of them have never had an affiliation with ASU until they made that agreement to work with us because they want to have access to our innovation engine or they want to have access to our students. So I'm at the table with people representing faculty and students and alumni and others as we think about, what's the through line, right? And I'm looking at it from pre-employment. I've got to go find people who want to come and work here and want it so bad that they'll actually make an application to work here, right? Then they've got to get through the interview process. Then I've got to onboard them. All of that, I got to make all of those activities part and parcel of the ASU experience, right?
Where we're talking about taking responsibility for outcomes, and producing one of the key pillars of the president is research that is applicable to today's world, that is functionally relevant And in that we're taking responsibility for outcomes. What makes this new conceptually?
If we're contributing research that looks at how we treat disease, for example, or the chronic spread of that. That's up for a public good. If you think about research that looks at any number of the things that you carbon capture, right, is taking care of what are we doing when we're releasing all this carbon dioxide into the environment, and if we can capture that somehow, put it to other uses, is that's going to help sustain the planet. If one believes that there are some climate effects that occur because of what happens if there's too much carbon dioxide in the environment. So all of these things are not just to say, I'm doing that just to do it, but I'm actually doing it to impact the outcome because I want to have a responsibility for the environment around me. All of this, we're all part of the same community and world, and it's certainly gotten more global in our outlook over the last 25-30 years. And so contributing to that is part of this concept that the president talks about in the charter. Whereas you could, ars gratia artis, just do art because you think art is beautiful. Okay. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but right, that's not part of the mandate at ASU.
What does it take to align the thousands of employees at ASU around this shared culture? What does it mean for you and your work?
Yeah. So it all starts at the top, right, with the leadership. He walks around the campus. We have 4 different campuses here. We have employee appreciation barbecues on each campus. On that day, he brings the entire university leadership group, some 150 to 200 leaders, have their quarterly meeting on that campus. So we're all present. He meets with the student leaders at all those campuses. He walks around the campus. He wears this baseball cap. He uses sunscreen. He lives the sort of Arizona way of you got to take care of your skin. And
Yeah.
he's engaging with people, right? He's talking to people. And that's what I do. I go to these things. I talk to people. We're on message. We're answering questions people have. And it just, that helps. I can't tell you that it's not a silver bullet, but showing up and talking about it helps.
All right, Michael. In our last segment here, I'm really grateful for your time today and
Yeah.
your insights. I wanted to have a little bit of a quick fire session where I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and get your immediate hot take on a few things.
Okay.
First one, something that employees say they want, but they don't actually want it.
That's really interesting. They say they want a lot of things. Free parking is the big thing.
But I bet they do want that.
They do.
Good.
I think employees sometimes say they want to manage other people, right? But when they then manage other people and they realize that's a lot of work and it can be quite messy, that they actually don't want that.
All right. The future of higher ed is remote, hybrid, in person. What's the future look like?
Yeah, I think it's hybrid. You're going to have people, you're going to have that community experience, residential halls, dining halls, where people come together physically and want to be present. So you're going to need that. And you're going to have students, employees, everything, faculty all over the world. And you're going to want, if you want the best, then you're going to have to take them where they are. So I say hybrid.
Michael Latsko, thank you so much for being on Speaking Engagement. Much obliged, sir. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ryan. Great to see you.